Okay, hi. Well, this is the first video that I've done for this channel, and I didn't really know where to start with the channel because I don't know what the channel is going to be yet. But hopefully, it's going to evolve naturally. But I think the channel is going to start by being basically a review channel of albums and of films, and then I may, because I'm a songwriter, put some of my own music up, or I may create a separate channel for people to go to look at my own music. But I've been watching a lot of these types of videos with people in their sort of, their man caves and their listening environments, and I thought it'd be an opportunity really to sort of show mine off. Because I've got a couple of listening rooms, got a big album collection, huge CD collection, and I really love listening to music and love music. And I was wondering which album I'm going to start with to review, and it struck me that it had to be one of the albums that I loved as a child growing up. That I found or discovered all by myself by going to what we call a car boot in the United Kingdom, which is basically a field full of cars where people are selling off things they don't want. And back in the early 90s, about probably 92, 93, I was going around one of these with my mum and dad and my nan, I think, at the time, and I came across this album. And it was a really battered copy of it, and I've still got the same copy of it. It's actually up there on my wall, showing at the time in an album sleeve, and it was from a library, so it was not in good condition at all. And it cost me pence to buy, and I took it home, and I listened to this album, and I thought it was fantastic, and it really got me into this artist. And I recently saw a video by a guy called Rockboy, who does a lot of album reviews online, and he was reviewing this artist and one of his albums, and it inspired me to perhaps review my favourite album of this artist. The artist, of course, is Billy Joel, and the album I want to review is an album called The Stranger. And I've got some statistics to tell you about The Stranger before we go into all the specifics and the artwork and all that kind of thing. And I've made some notes here. The album was originally released before I was born. It was released on the 29th of September 1977. It was released on CBS Columbia Records. That was of course, the record label that Billy's always been signed to. And just looking at some of these statistics, it was certified diamond in the United States. It spent 6 weeks at number 2 on the US album charts back in 1977. So I mean, this is a very popular album with a lot of people, and it's not been reviewed an awful lot on YouTube, which surprises me, which is one of the reasons again that I chose to review this particular album. Looking at Rolling Stone's list of 500 albums, greatest albums, this album actually comes in at number 50. So out of 500 greatest albums, number 50 is not bad going in my view, anyway. But this album was not Billy's first album. It's an album that came out, I think it's his 4th album actually, from memory. You've got Cold Spring Harbor, which there is a huge story behind. Any Billy Joel fans know about that already. And then you've got the Piano Man album, which had the hit, of course, Piano Man on it, but wasn't a particularly successful album. You then got the Street Life Serenade album, which is good, but sort of unrealised, as was Turnstiles, the album after that, which again has got some great tracks on it. But for some reason, the production on those albums is not brilliant. It sounds very studio, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Initially, when I was younger and I heard those albums, I didn't think they were as good as this. As an older person, I listened to them and I actually think they're brilliant, brilliant albums. But this album's special because when Billy wrote the songs for this album and was going to record it, I think the story is well known that he wanted to use the band he was touring with, and the band he was touring with at the time were Dynamite, because he had a fantastic drummer, a guy called Liberty Devitto, who is just awesome and doesn't play with Billy anymore for whatever reason, and it's a terrible shame. And in fact, we're in 2016 now. We're actually in October. Billy played Wembley Stadium in England in September, and I didn't go. And it's the first Billy concert I've not been to where he's been here. I would normally always go and see him. And part of the reason is because Liberty's not with him anymore. It's such a shame. And I think that his sound it's just been watered down slightly. He's still a great live band, still a great live performer. But without that core band that he originally had, it doesn't sound quite as good. And I didn't want to spend over almost £100, I think it was, per ticket, when there were various other gigs that I could go to around the same time that were a lot less. I won't go into who it was, But yeah, there were other gigs I went to the next day actually instead, and I just chose that. I think if Billy had played a couple of dates, I might have gone to see him. But hey ho, I didn't catch him this time. I hopefully will catch him next time. But yeah, so anyway, this album comes about because Billy writes a load of songs and he wants to record with his band, Liberty Devitto on drums, who is just a fantastic, phenomenal drummer. And he's a great stage performer as well. When you see him live on stage, he really is great. And at the time he had a great bassist called Doug Stegmeyer, who's no longer with us. But again, him and Liberty together and that rhythm section was fantastic. And then Billy hammering his piano with some really great, almost Beatles-esque tunes at times on this album. The album's really phenomenal. Let's start by going through the tracks on the album, because I've got the vinyl. Actually, I've got it a couple of times on vinyl. I don't know if you can see that particularly well. It's reflecting from its jacket. I've got this a few times on vinyl. I've got the original vinyl that I spoke about a minute ago that I bought for probably less than £1 back in the early 90s. And then I've got this copy of the album, which is playing behind me, which is in much better condition and is actually a great copy of the album. But it's a great album to listen to on vinyl. It was recorded for vinyl. And there are certain albums that really translate well to vinyl, and I think this is one of them. And I'm not being a snob about that, because I love CDs. And at the moment, with the whole, and it's something I might get into on the channel at a later date, the whole vinyl revolution is becoming a little bit staid for me. I own a lot of vinyl. I love listening to records. I love playing records. I know what it is to take a record out of a sleeve, listen to side A, turn it over, listen to side B. It's something I'm going to get into on a later video. But I also love CDs, which are getting such a hard time at the minute. I mean, you know, nobody likes CDs. And you can go to these car boots, these things I'm talking about, and you can pick up CDs for next to no money. It's crazy. But I digress. We're talking about this album, The Stranger, Billy Joel. The album starts with a track that Billy plays all the time in concert. And he plays this because it's such a great song. It's Movin' Out, Anthony's song, or Anthony's song, depending on where you're from in the world, which is a song all about growing up and leaving home and finding your feet and being an adult, I suppose, for want of a better word, and how some people perhaps don't transition to that as early as others. I didn't leave home until I was 26. So I can sort of understand that, but there's not always a need to leave home. But it's a great song and it rings true, and it's not a lovey-dovey song. It's an interesting song with a great melody and a great counterpoint as well. The bass and the drums are fantastic on it. Moving on, the album that's playing behind me is a track called The Stranger, which starts with this sort of whistling going on in the background, and then it goes into this brilliant sort of just almost jaggedy type track. It's really fun to listen to, and I always loved it. And it's a track about how, and the track's all interesting lyrically as well as musically, about how people have different personas and present themselves differently in different situations, and even to yourself sometimes you present yourself differently. And I think that's a really interesting idea for a song. It's not these aren't ideas for songs that get repeated very often. That's one of the interesting things about the album, because Moving Out, what are the songs similar to that in recorded history? I can't think of any. If you can think of any, put down please in the comments below, but I can't think of any like that. And The Stranger, again, it's a really interesting track. Billy's got the lovey-dovey songs on this song as well, because he's well known for that. I think Rock Boy, in his review of River of Dreams, the album River of Dreams, which is what inspired this video, spoke about how Billy's normally got sort of a piano-led type love song on his albums. And that's absolutely true. There are normally, and the next track on this album is one of those. It's Just the Way You Are. A massive track, a massive hit. Everybody knows it. People know it more for the Barry White version than for Billy's version, bizarrely. But Billy made all the money out of it, right? So, he's not crying. And it's this track that he plays. It's a track that he says he doesn't like very much. And I can understand why, because it doesn't really fit with the rest of the album as well. Because it's a lovey-dovey track. It's a little bit obvious, you might say. But on first listen, it's a great song. And it is a great song. It's a standard, really. So it's a song I love, and I always listen to when it's on. I never sort of hit the forward button on the CD player or pull the needle out of the record and go to the next track. But the next track that comes up is just phenomenal. It's a masterpiece, and it's one of the reasons that this album is so great. It's a track called Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. It gets played on Radio 2 here in England all the time, still to this day. And it's an opus. You know, I've heard Billy talk about this track on various seminars and CDs and things that he puts out there. And what he said is that he had a number of ideas for songs, and he just, in a genius way, weaves the tracks together and makes a song on this album that is just phenomenal, and it takes you on a journey. And if you sit and listen to it with headphones on in the dark, you will be blown away. And it's the track that really made me fall in love with the album, because I remember as a young 13-year-old boy getting this album, an album that a 13-year-old shouldn't really like, but knowing it sounded great musically. And then this track comes on, and the lyrics are all about, they're not sort of the standard lyrics. Again, it's all about people in school that are really, really successful, but then sort of peak a bit too early. And in later life, they're not so successful. And I thought that, even as a 13-year-old, I thought that was a really interesting idea for a song. But when you hear the music and the different parts of it, and it's like Dixieland in places, and then it goes into sort of more rock and roll, and then it goes for straight rock, it's just phenomenal. And it's so well produced and so well played by the band that it really is a classic. And I think that this is probably the pinnacle track on the album, and it's certainly my favourite. And in the comments, please, as I'm going through the tracks, let me know which is your favourite, because I'd like to know sort of, what people think of this album and what they think of the different tracks within it, and which are their favourites and which aren't. The next track is a track that made the album, I think, quite successful in America on its initial release, a track called Only the Good Die Young, which is a brilliant, brilliant song. I remember when I was having music lessons when I first got this album, I took it into my music teacher at the time, and I asked him how you play Only the Good Die Young, and he could play by ear, and he showed me how to play it on the piano in the schoolroom, and I remember just sitting there like this. It was a magical moment. I'll never ever forget that. And then he showed me how to play it on the guitar, and it was the first, because I was learning to play guitar with him, and it was the first song on the guitar that I was really genuinely excited about playing. And it was the first time I remember thinking, God, I'm actually really enjoying music lessons and learning to play an instrument, because I could play something that I loved and something that made sense to me and was relevant to me at that time, and still is. But this was directly after I'd first seen Billy in concert as well. My dad took me to see him. There's a whole story about that. But yeah, it was just a phenomenal moment, and that's what that song always reminds me of now. Whenever I hear it, I can see my old piano teacher, Clive, sitting down at that piano and playing, and showing it me on the guitar at the time. He never actually showed it to me on the piano. He did give me some piano lessons, but he never showed it me on the piano. But I sort of learned it myself in later life, or a version of it, for want of a better word. But no, it's a great fun track, and it made the album popular in America because apparently the track was banned by the Catholic Church, who thought that it was in very poor taste. And I think that was fantastic, because Billy said that actually helped it sell more records. They say no press is bad press, don't they? And perhaps that's proof of it. Moving on, She's Always a Woman. I have a memory of going to see Billy for the first time in 1994 here in England, and him playing part. He didn't play the whole song of She's Only a Woman. I knew it. Everyone knows it. It's one of those standard songs that gets played on the radio all the time. But Billy played this song, and he played it with different lyrics to the lyrics that were that are on the record, and they're sort of lovey-dovey lyrics, obviously, on the record. But in the concert, I'm sure he played some lyrics that was something about sitting on like a high-rise floor of like a high-rise apartment in New York while he was writing it. And it was just a great moment, and the whole arena laughed and roared with laughter when they heard him tell this story, which is something about that show that really sticks in my mind. And lots of things about that show really stick in my mind, but that's one of them, and it was a special moment. The next two albums are not quite as good. They're not bad at all, but up to now, every track on this album has been huge and has been so interesting musically, and just an absolute joy to listen to. The next track on the album is good, but I think it was written a number of years before the other tracks, and I think that sort of shows because there is a maturity in the music and in the way the music's put together. But there's a track called Get It Right the First Time, which again, the band are fantastic on. Liberty's playing great drums on it. Billy's banging the piano. It sounds like I remember reading Phil Ramone's book about recording and engineering, and he said that Billy sometimes used to sit in front of Liberty Devitto, who was on a platform, and he would be competing with the sound of the drums, and he would hit the piano so hard that Phil Ramone actually thought the piano strings might break, which I think is a fantastic story. And you see Billy playing it really hard and stuff in concerts, but I could imagine that when I read that. And on this track, Get It Right the First Time, it's a really good example of you can really hear everyone's going 100% for a song. It's a good song, but just not quite as great as some of the other tracks on this album, like Scenes from an Italian Restaurant or The Stranger or Moving Out. And then the album finishes with a track called Everybody Has a Dream, which I didn't used to think that much of at all. I used to think the album finished on a bit of a low note. But as I've matured and I've got older, I've actually come to appreciate this track a lot more. But again, I suspect it wasn't written at the same time as the other tracks, because those two last tracks do strike me as being just not quite to the standard that the rest of the album is. But they're still fantastic tracks. If they'd been on any other album, I would be saying they were brilliant masterpieces. But because they're against such stiff competition on this album, I don't think they're quite as good as some of the other tracks on it. But I mean, tell me what you think of them again in the comments below. I'd really like to know. So anyway, I've got the album on a number of formats, and I thought it'd be interesting to perhaps take you through the different formats that I've got the album on. The first, of course, is the original edition of The Stranger, which I have framed on my wall in my listening room, which is fun to have still, but doesn't play very well, which is why it's in the frame. But it's a great cover because it's The Stranger. It's Billy sitting in a room, as you can see. Oh, it looks fantastic. It's black and white. It's really moody. And there's some boxing gloves. Where are they? Some boxing gloves there behind Billy. And Billy was a boxer, as a lot of people know, before he became a very successful musician and performing artist. And I wonder if that was a nod to, that's the stranger. Who is that person now? Who is the boxer? Because I'm now the successful musician. And I think that's what that was probably a nod to. Because as you look in the album cover, you open the album up, you'll see the insert sleeve, which I've got here. And again, it's Billy with those boxing gloves around him. So he's certainly trying to tell us something about that. And I think it's a direct connection to the song The Stranger. That's just my take. I've never heard him say that on any of the interviews I've ever seen him do. But I think it's an interesting concept. And I think it's certainly there for that reason. Then on the back of the album, you've got this absolutely fantastic band that I was talking about. You've got Liberty Devitto there. Please come and play with Billy again, Liberty, because you're the man. Doug Stegmeyer, who, as I say, is no longer with us since I can't play with Billy anymore. But fantastic musician. Richie Kanata, who played with Billy when he toured in 2006 again, but for some reason isn't playing with him at the moment. And then you've got, obviously, Phil Ramone producing the album. A fantastic album art, really. I mean, really, it complements the quality of the album absolutely perfectly. And then I also have the album twice on CD. Actually, I bought it 3 times on CD. I originally bought it on CD after I bought that copy up there because I wanted a clean copy to listen to. And then it was remastered in about 1998, I think it was remastered. And I bought the remastered copy, and I was blown away by the sound quality of that at the time. And now I have this edition, which I bought about 10 years later. Again, I think this was released in about 2007. It must have been, because this is the 30th anniversary box set of the album. And this is something really worth getting. You can still get it on YouTube. Not on YouTube, sorry, on Amazon. You can still get it. It's absolutely a fantastic 30th anniversary edition. It's a Legacy edition by Columbia. And when you open it up, you've got the original CD. You also have a CD live at Carnegie Hall that was recorded on June the 3rd, 1977. Now, the record didn't come out until September. And this concert has songs from the record that are being premiered, essentially. And it's so exciting to listen to how the songs evolved and to listen to what they sounded like live back in June to how when they were recorded a few months later and put out on the record. But when you listen to Just the Way You Are, for instance, Liberty's playing a completely different drum beat at the show in 1977. and it's a really interesting to see how the song evolved with the band playing on it, and I just think it's fantastic. I mean, it's a great concert. It's Billy absolutely at the peak of his powers. Before I was born, I never got to see him at the peak of his powers. I've seen him, he's been fantastic, but this really is something special. And then he plays scenes from an Italian restaurant, presumably for one of the very first times, because he actually says it's a premiere before he plays it. And some of the saxophone parts are different, because again, they're not fully realised, and that's one of the reasons that this CD is so worth getting, and this box set is so worth getting. So they're the 2 CDs. I think you can buy this with just the 2 CDs, and it's a lot cheaper, or you can buy this box set. But if you get the box set, you also get a DVD, which has Billy on tour in March of 1978 in London, so just down the road from me. And he plays songs from the previous albums that I spoke about, plus some songs from The Stranger. And the band are on fire, and the songs sound so much better than they do on the albums. So much better. I would definitely recommend getting this. It's been shown on television here a few times in England, and I had seen it before I got the box set, but when I got the box set, it was nice to have it on a DVD that comes so well packaged with the album. And then, of course, there is a documentary on this also. I think it was about a 30-minute documentary, which is Billy talking about the album and recording the album and the process leading up to recording the album. And it's great to hear his thoughts on it too. And then also you get this brilliant sort of little book inside of it, which is all Billy's handwritten notes, reprinted. I'm sure it's not the originals. This would be worth a lot of money. There is essentially a concert poster for Carnegie Hall, which I won't get out now, but it's nice to have inside of it. And you also have the 30th anniversary edition. Sorry, it's falling apart. Of this brilliant book with these fantastic photographs. I don't know if you can see them. That's Billy playing live there, presumably in 1977 or thereabouts. There are these lovely glossy photographs that weren't included on the original album, and they're fantastic to have. And then you've got the band holding up the record in this photograph, presumably as it's been given a gold award. Got colour versions of the photographs in it. I mean, for a fan of the album, this really is the way to own this album. And a lot of people would say, oh, you need to hear it on vinyl. And it sounds great on vinyl, and it's worth having on vinyl. I would absolutely suggest anybody picks it up, because you can get it on record for a really reasonable price second hand. And if you clean it up, it will probably sound better than the remastered version that they put out for sort of £20. I think an original pressing of this, because it's from the analog tapes, will sound better. But it's also worth having this set because it's got so much in it, and so much here that's not on the album. I would say please go to the shops and get them before they sell out, because they're really great. Anyway, I think that is my review of the album, and that completes my first video on YouTube. So please leave your comments below, tell me what you think, and let me know your thoughts on the album, and maybe your history with it, and where you discovered it, and how you discovered it, and your favourite tracks on it, and because I look forward to reading that. Anyway, YouTube, this is me signing out, and thanks to Rockboy for inspiring me to do the video. Thanks very much. Take care.